So 2 weeks ago, we ended up talking quite a bit, and I was not able to finish my remarks having to do with class 3, which was sort of an introduction to some of the key ideas that Wilber has around religion. So what I'd like to do is try and finish that tonight, and then launch into the next topic, which is the great chain of being. We probably won't finish that one tonight, but that's fine. Okay, so I think I had just finished talking about some of the main elements of Wilber's thinking, particularly the fact that it's an interdisciplinary approach, that he's using integral mapping, and that the map is not the territory. But tonight I want to start with talking about translation versus transformation. In a series of books, beginning from Up from Eden in 1981, then followed by The Sociable God in 83, and The Eye of Spirit in 97, Wilber has attempted to show that religion has always performed two very different and very important functions. The first function is to create meaning for the self. It's a kind of horizontal movement. The second function is to transcend the self, a kind of vertical movement. And you can think either higher or deeper, depending on your choice of a metaphor here. So Wilber calls the first function translation, while the second he labels transformation. These are very important ideas, so I've got a little bit lengthy items here for us to share. So I'll just go in here and see if I can get to it. How do I do that? Sorry. I've got so many open here. Oh, I realized something. I forgot to open the readings for tonight.
They're showing up.
Those are last week's.
Oh, those are last week. Oh, sorry.
I have to, I think I should be able to fix that later. Anyway, so let's see where we're at. Why don't we start with Margaret Boland with number 18.
So reading 18.
Yes, please.
Translation. Translation acts as a way of creating meaning for the separate self. It offers myths and stories and tales and narratives and revivals that, taken together, help the separate self make sense of and endure the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. This function of religion does not usually or necessarily change the level of consciousness in a person. It does not deliver radical transformation, nor does it deliver a shattering liberation from the separate self altogether. Rather, it consoles the self, fortifies the self, defends the self, promotes the self. As long as the separate self believes the myths, performs the rituals, mouths the prayers, or embraces the dogma, then the self, it is fervently believed, will be saved, either now in the glory of being God-saved or goddess-favored, or in an afterlife that ensures eternal wonderment. Ken Wilber, One Taste, the Journals of Ken Wilber.
Okay, very clear. Thank you. So with translation, the self is given a new way to think or feel about reality. The self is given a new belief, perhaps holistic instead of atomistic, perhaps forgiveness instead of blame, perhaps relational instead of analytic. The self then learns to translate its world and its being in the terms of this new belief or new language or new paradigm. This new and enchanting translation acts, at least temporarily, to alleviate or diminish the terror inherent in the heart of the separate self. Now, transformation is a different story. Okay, Sai, how would you like to do this one for us? 19.
Okay, I'll just have to lean forward. On the other hand, transformation, on the other hand, does not fortify the separate self, but utterly shatters it. Not consolation, but devastation. Not entrenchment, but emptiness. Not complacency, but explosion, not comfort, but revolution. In short, not a conventional bolstering of consciousness, but a radical transmutation and transformation of the deepest seat of consciousness itself.
Ooh, this is kind of scary. And I think this is what Baha'u'llah is driving at with the valley of utter nothingness. With transformation, the very process of translation itself is challenged, witnessed, undermined, and eventually dismantled. Typically, translation provides the self with a new way to think about the world, but with radical transformation, the self itself is inquired into, looked into, grabbed by its throat, and literally throttled to death. Horizontal translation is by far the most prevalent, widespread, and widely shared function of religion. The number of people who are ready for radical transformation has always been and will likely continue to be a very small minority. Wilber is quick to point out that translation is an absolutely necessary and crucial function for the greater part of our lives. Those who are unable to translate adequately with a fair amount of integrity and accuracy will soon fall into severe neurosis or possibly even psychosis. In such cases, the world ceases to make sense. The boundaries between the self and the world are not transcended, but instead begin to crumble. This is not breakthrough, but breakdown, not transcendence, but disaster. But even for the successful translators, at some point in the maturation process, translation itself ceases to satisfy. Now, David Erickson, would you be interested in reading number 20, please?
Oops, we lost them and they're just coming back.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll
I
just
didn't
skip it.
realize that. Yeah,
Okay, no problem. How about Alan? We'll come back to them in a minute.
okay.
I'm just, okay. Number 20.
Yes, please.
By the way, I just wanted to add something is that we see the same thing. There's Thomas Kuhn wrote a book about scientific revolution, and he
Right.
said it's the same process as what we're just seeing here. It's not strictly a religious thing. In the sense that he said, you'll have a theory like Newton's gravity, and it works and people are fine with it and they can do wonderful things with it. But then they start looking at larger bodies like planets and realize that no, something's wrong here. What we predicted using Newton's laws of gravity don't work, and we don't understand why. And then they try to build in through this translation process is that they try to say, well, if we add this fudge factor and we justify it this way, then maybe we can accept Newton's laws as being correct.
Correct.
And
That's
then they
right.
run into something else and it doesn't work, and something else, and it gets worse and worse and worse over time. And then finally, along comes an Einstein, and he rewrites the laws, and the laws work in every place, in every situation. But there's still people who will fight for Newton and his laws of gravity. And they can't change. They can't move to transformation from translation. They can just translate it through all the little fudge factors that they use. They can't actually do a transformation anymore.
Actually, though,
Okay.
Alan, I would say, though, that having heard you say that what we're talking about in that particular case is sort of translation on a small scale, trying to fix an existing conception, and then replacing it with a slightly more embracing conception, which is a greater type of translation. Transformation is getting rid of all conceptions, bar none.
Maybe a better way would be looking at the transformation as what happens to the scientist versus the translation, which is what happens to a group. Would that work?
I think not.
Okay.
But let's dig in a little bit more as
Yes.
to what exactly transformation is that Wilbur's talking about. Maybe you'll see what I'm saying.
Yep. So reading 20. Translation itself, no matter how adequate or confident, simply ceases to console. No new beliefs, no new paradigm, no new myths, no new ideas will staunch the encroaching anguish. Not a new belief for the self, but the transcendence of the self altogether is the only path that avails.
And I think
Wilbur, one taste.
he put that no new paradigm in specifically to deal with the example you raised, because he does talk about Kuhn quite a bit. So,
Yeah.
so transformation is not just replacing one paradigm with another, which we've seen many examples of in history. Anyway, let's not get hung up on that for now. Horizontal translation offers legitimacy. Legitimacy to the self's beliefs, its paradigms, its worldview, its way in the world. This function of religion has been the single greatest and most important function of the world's religious traditions. Okay, so did David and Belinda come back?
Yes. they
So,
were with us.
David, could I ask you to read number 21 for me?
Can you see it, David? No, we can't hear you, even though it looks like you're unmuted, but we can't hear you. Ask again, Mark. I'm not sure if they heard.
Oh, okay. So, David Erickson, are you able to read number 21 for me?
Yeah, I'll send them a text message. There's something not working, obviously.
Okay, no problem.
Okay.
Well, in that case, how about Lori? Could you fill in for David
Yeah.
here?
Yes. Reading 21. The capacity of a religion to provide horizontal meaning, legitimacy, and sanction for the self and its beliefs. That function of religion has historically been the single greatest social glue that any culture has. And one does not tamper easily or lightly with the basic glue that holds societies together. Because more often than not, when the glue dissolves, when that translation dissolves, the result is not breakthrough, but breakdown, not liberation, but social chaos.
As we are experiencing now,
Mhm.
unfortunately. So where translative religion offers legitimacy, transformative religion offers authenticity. For those few individuals who are ready, those who are sick with the suffering of the separate self, and are unable to embrace the legitimate worldview, a transformative opening to true authenticity, true enlightenment, true liberation, calls more and more insistently. Depending on one's capacity for suffering, one will sooner or later answer the call of authenticity or transformation, of liberation on the horizon of infinity. Transformative religion is revolutionary. It does not legitimate the world, it breaks the world. It does not console the world, it shatters it. It does not render the self content, it renders it undone. No, let me see. Is Belinda there? Or David, did you get an answer? Linda?
They're trying to connect. I can see connecting to audio, but they're having difficulty.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Okay, Ingrid,
Mhm.
could you read number 22 for me, please?
Sure. Transformative spirituality does not seek to bolster or legitimate any present worldview at all, but rather to provide true authenticity by shattering what the world takes as legitimate. Legitimate consciousness is sanctioned by the consensus, adopted by the herd mentality, embraced by the culture and the counterculture both, promoted by the separate self as the way to make sense of this world. But authentic consciousness quickly shakes all of that off its back and settles instead into a glance that sees only a radiant infinity in the heart of all souls and breathes into its lungs only the atmosphere of an eternity too simple to believe. That's also Ken Wilber from One Taste.
Thank you. That was very good. Okay, so I want to switch slightly to academic religion. It's too bad Jack isn't here yet. He'll be here a little after 8 o'clock. But both of us having spent our learning periods in academic religion, I think he could really relate to this. In November 1997, which is the year that Wilber was writing his journals about this One Taste, he attended the annual conference of the American Academy of Religion with a few of his friends. One of these was Roger Walsh, a professor of psychiatry, philosophy, and anthropology, as well as professor in the religious studies program at the University of California at Irvine. This is what he looks like. Kind of nice guy. A very close friend of Wilbur's. Roger had regularly attended these conferences in the past as part of his professional responsibilities. Apparently, he always reported the same thing. The scholars who attend such conferences are involved in almost nothing but translative spirituality. And then not even in an engaged fashion, but merely as an object of dreary, detached, desiccated study. As he told Wilber, to attend most of these talks is to take boredom into uncharted waters. And I have to agree, having been to Carleton and University of Toronto, that's what it was starting to become like. And that was at the beginning of the process of postmodernism taking over. And I suspect Jack would second that. So here's Wilber's reaction to Roger's assessment. That is number 23. Oh, Lisa gets a chance to read this one.
Okay. When I was a youngster, and being the mad scientist type, I used to collect insects. Central to this endeavor was the killing jar. You take an empty mayonnaise jar, put lethal carbon tetrachloride on cotton balls, and place them in the bottom of the jar. You then drop the insect, moth, butterfly, whatnot, into the jar, and it quickly dies, but without being outwardly disfigured. Then you mount it, study it, display it.
Finish the next sentence, please.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Academic religion is the killing jar of spirit.
Whoa. So we had a question a while back about, I think it was Leslie who asked why Wilber is not, his name is not heard very much in academic circles. This kind of thinking may have something to do with it. Do you want to study a desiccated spirit, or do you want to live it? I know when I was in my studies, it was becoming a major issue, the fact that I was a believer and wanting to study world religions. They would have much preferred me to disabuse myself of that conception and just approach it intellectually, which I couldn't do, which is why I didn't go on to get a PhD. Anyway, that's enough of the personal sharing. So I want to talk about an incredibly rare bird. While Wilbur and Walsh both have their preference for the transformative function of religion, they are realistic about its extreme rarity. It is a fairly common belief that the East is awash in transformative and authentic spirituality. The West, both historically and in today's New Age, is believed to offer nothing more than various types of horizontal, translative, merely legitimate, and therefore tepid spirituality. Although there may be some truth into this, Wilbur learned that the situation is actually much gloomier for both the East and the West alike. Wilbur asked this fellow, Katagiri Roshi, with whom he had his first breakthrough, how many truly great Chan and Zen masters there have historically been. Without hesitating, he said, maybe 1,000 altogether. That's through all history. Wilbur then asked another Zen master how many truly enlightened, deeply enlightened Japanese Zen masters there were alive today. And he said, not more than a dozen. If these two masters were anywhere near right in their estimates, this means that only a minute portion of the Chinese and Japanese populations had graduated to an authentic, transformative spirituality. Okay, Bill, you mind reading again? This is number 24.
Thus, without in any way belittling the truly stunning contributions of the glorious Eastern traditions, the point is fairly straightforward. Radical transformative spirituality is extremely rare anywhere in history and anywhere in the world. The numbers for the West are even more depressing. I rest my case.
So transformative spirituality is thus an incredibly rare bird, anywhere, at any time, at any place. Wilbur argues that vertical, transformative, authentic spirituality is therefore one of the most precious jewels in the entire human tradition, precisely because, like all precious jewels, it is incredibly rare. Okay, so even though Wilbur believes that transformative spirituality is the most important function provided by religion, he realizes that it will be more valuable to offer the world more benign and helpful modes of translation. In other words, he is devoted to bringing people with a more adequate way to translate their condition. He believes that we must start with helpful translations before we can effectively offer authentic translations. Why so? He maintains that if translation is taken away from an individual or culture too quickly, too abruptly, or too ineptly, the result will not be breakthrough but breakdown, not release but collapse. He gives the example of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, who we met when we were doing the Buddhist course earlier this year. When Trungpa, who was a great but controversial Tibetan master, first went to the United States, he was famous for saying, when first asked the meaning of Vajrayana Buddhism or Tibetan Buddhism, there is only Ati, A-T-I. In other words, there is only the enlightened mind wherever you look. This is the Tibetan view of things. The ego, samsara, maya, and illusion, all of them do not have to be gotten rid of because none of them actually exist. There is only Ati, there is only spirit, there is only God. There is only non-dual consciousness anywhere in existence. Not surprisingly, although almost nobody understood what Trungpa was talking about. No one was ready for this radical and authentic realization of always already truth. Therefore, Trungpa eventually introduced a whole series of lesser practices leading up to this radical and ultimate no practice. He introduced the 9 yanas, the 9 stages or levels of practice, culminating in the ultimate no practice of always already ati. These were mostly translative practices designed to prepare people step by step for the obviousness of what is. And so as a Baha'i, the immediate parallel is the 7 valleys. So those first 6 steps are translative. It's only when you get to the 7th one that you're talking transformation. So when we're trying to encourage people to become Baha'is, we're putting them on the path, a translative path where they're, for instance, either going from no religion whatsoever or from an existing world religion to something much more recent, more appropriate to today. And then as they live their lives over decades, gradually they may get to the point where they're thirsty for that transformation. So Baha'u'llah adopted a similar double approach in his writings, specifically in the 7 valleys. After carefully explaining the mysteries enshrined in the stages of ascent for them that seek to journey unto God, the Almighty, the ever-forgiving, which is in the Call of the Divine Beloved, the section on the 7 valleys, Baha'u'llah offers a rapid alternative to the gradual path to God. Let's see, Joey Lougheed is our next speaker, number 25.
These journeys have no visible ending in this temporal world, but the detached wayfarer should invisible confirmation descend upon him and the guardian of the cause assist him, may traverse these 7 stages in 7 steps, nay, rather in 7 breaths, nay, even in a single breath, should God will and desire it. This is a token of his grace vouchsafed unto whomsoever he pleaseth.
Thank you. So, by the way, Shoghi Effendi himself made it clear that the word guardian in the 7 valleys here has no connection with the Baha'i guardianship. I think it's actually a reference to Baha'u'llah himself. Okay, our last point before we switch gears to our next class is what I call the Omega point. For Wilber, spirituality is, in the final analysis, more valuable than all his own collected works taken together. Oh, I see Bill has his hand up. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Bill.
Okay. So when you mentioned the thirst for transformation, and I was wondering, like, because we talked about the number of people who have transformed is relatively rare. What do you see as what does Wilber see as the ratio of people who are thirsty for transformation that actually make progress transforming? In other words, are there a lot of like thirsty people out there that never make it, and that are pursuing it and that reach different levels of approaching it, or is a thirst an automatic guarantee that you make it? That's the rare thing.
Good question. Well, he doesn't really break it down that way, but I know from reading about Tibetan Buddhism that there are many, many, many people who enter the river, so to speak, who attempt to cross it, but who ultimately fail. But with the caveat that, with the understanding that that's only talking about this particular life. Of course, they're thinking long-term about many lives, being able to come back and continue to work on this. So they're not particularly dismayed when they don't reach that state of enlightenment. They feel they can build on what they've done in this life. So I would say that it's probably thousands to one for every person who attains final enlightenment and becomes a Buddha. From a Baha'i perspective, I would say there are no people that ever make that, except for the manifestations of God. But that's kind of a red herring that we probably shouldn't talk to Buddhists about, at least not right away. Harold, are you thinking on this subject here?
Oh, quite a bit. I wonder if you can, I got something to say, but let's finish this this session first, maybe. You have to, right?
Okay,
Yeah, okay.
I'm all for that if Bill's okay,
Yeah.
but keep it coming. Okay, let's wrap this part up. So for, I need to bring up the screen sharing again, sorry. All right. For Wilbur, spirituality is, in the final analysis, more valuable than all his collected works taken together. As Frank Visser puts it, Wilbur's work is sustained by a deeply spiritual motivation that will be clear to anyone able to read between the lines of his books. In an autobiographical article in the publication called The Quest in 1995, Wilbur explained his ultimate goal. And that happens to be Danielle's turn. Number 26.
Okay. The point of my books is not to get people involved in intellectual head trips. That is exactly what my books are attempting to stop, as those who have read them will readily acknowledge. I have attempted to engage these academic people in their own game and to play it very fast and hard, simply to get to this conclusion. At some point, you and I must stop this intellectual head tripping and begin actual spiritual practice. We must begin contemplation, or yoga, or satsang, or zazen, or vision quest, or any number of other genuine contemplative practices. There are hundreds of practices. I'm mentioning only a few. But we must actually do this as a practice, not talking religion, not chit-chat, but engaged, concerned, passionate, intense practice. Franz Visser, more integral than thou.
So this is where he's aiming for. I call that Serenity Lake. It's actually in New Zealand. Lake Mapurika. Beautiful. I mean, many of our lakes are like that, but I didn't find a shot that I liked. So thank you, Danielle. And Zilda, could you finish that reading off, number 27?
Sure. And in that practice, all your books, all your thoughts, and all your ideas will fail you miserably. You will burn in the fire of your own primordial awareness. And from the ashes of the smoking ruins of the shattered ego, there will spontaneously arise a new destiny in the stream of consciousness itself. And you will be taken, transformed, ravished, and transfigured in the glory of the divine. And you will speak with the tongues of angels and see with the eyes of saints, and glories upon glories will enwrap and uplift your soul. And the lost and found beloved will whisper in your ear, and the divine will sparkle so intensely in every sight and sound. The wind will hum the hallowed names of the radiant divine. while the clouds will crawl across the sky just to call your name. And your very self will resurrect as the entire cosmos itself, the haunting sound of one hand clapping in each and every direction. And it all will be undone in that extraordinary hymn, the hymn of spiritual practice.
That was beautiful. Thank you, Zilda. Okay, and that is how I ended my third class. Too bad we didn't get to do that last time, but there's a lot in there. So Harold, did you want to
Yeah,
comment further?
okay, yeah, I'd like to use the horizontal and vertical dimensions, and the way I'm not trying to talk about exclusively Wilbur, but the vertical dimension you might think of as developing individual consciousness. It could be looking deep within or elevating to the divine realm. And I think, so I think Wilbur is almost exclusively dealing with that dimension, the vertical. I believe that religion is about both vertical and horizontal. So transformation happens horizontally as well. Religion transforms society. It does not only transform individuals, it transforms society. We can't understand what happened in human history without looking at the impact, the societal transformative impact of religions. So it seems to me Wilbur is in a psychologistic or spiritualistic zone only. He's sort of going up and down, and the word transformation applies to society as a whole. Baha'u'llah, for example, came to change the whole world. So while we're making individual progress, we should also be making societal or horizontal transformative progress as well. In other words, we're here to save ourselves, but we're here to work on changing society so that everyone can develop. I think that this is a very old world way of looking at it, the way Wilbur is. So you're analyzing religion in terms of to what degree can that save the soul or develop the individual consciousness? Religion is about much more than that. It changes institutions, it changes laws, it changes art, it changes even scientific worldviews. So religion is especially now, I especially believe that given the Baha'i faith, it's a world-centric, to use Wilbur's term. It's world-centric. I don't see Wilbur being very world-centric. He's still talking about the development of individual consciousness. And that I think so that's missing at least half of what religion's about, maybe more if we talk about the Baha'i faith, which is all about transforming the world as a whole, changing culture as a whole, changing the meaning of governance as a whole, transforming the meaning of power as a whole. Those are all collective things. If you look at sort of the principles of the Baha'i faith, most of them are directed to changing or the what I'm calling the horizontal transformative dimension. So Wilbur does not talk about this very much. I don't think he talks about it at all, but I know that you know Wilbur much better than me. But most of this is up and down a vertical dimension. Anyway, that's my reaction to what I'm understanding so far.
Okay, so I guess I have to admit that the subject area that Wilbur covers is so wide that I've had to start somewhere. So I thought I would start with the individual. And so I think what he's talking about with the translation and the transformation possibilities is all in one corner of his quadrant map, which Merrill is showing us on the screen here. Now, this is something that I'm going to be coming to later. So he does in fact talk about the other 3/4 of the pie, which religion addresses, that all sorts of other types of academic study address. He does take them into account, but I had to start somewhere with something that I thought most people were familiar with, which is what goes on inside individual heads and hearts. So I apologize for giving that impression that that's all he's about, because that's just a starting point, really. As we'll see, I think it's in class 7 that we're really going to start addressing the quadrants. But leading up to that, this next class on the Great Chain of Being is going to talk about what has been historically said about that individual pursuit of growth. And then looking at the critiques that were launched against it at various points of history by what he calls the moderns and the postmoderns, which pretty well devastated it. They devastated metaphysics completely, and the Great Chain, which was a good part of that. But he feels that it's possible to resuscitate it with a broader perspective. So he answers those critiques, and that's what our next class is going to be about. So I don't know, Harold, if you can just sort of hang in there for a little while longer before I get to the broader view that he asks us to share with him.
That broader view he calls cosmocentric with a K.
Correct.
So he brings metaphysics back into the picture, but again, metaphysics is still the vertical dimension. I want to see it. I'm talking about a horizontal dimension, building the world together, culture.
Yeah, that's one of the quadrants. The lower left is culture, and the institutions are.
But he doesn't really talk about it.
Oh, he does. He does.
I'll wait. I'll try to be patient.
The sociable God, for instance, is about those cultural things that you're talking about. So he does address them, but I have to say, I just had to start by focusing on one topic, which gives us a skewed view of where he's coming from. But I mean, he's a broad thinker. This guy synthesized an enormous amount. So I apologize, but not too worried. I'm not too worried about it. Okay, so we've got Jack, and then we've got Bill with questions or comments.
I apologize for coming late, but I had a compulsory meeting here at the co-op. So I think we need to give, as Mark's pointing out, we have to give Wilbur a fair hearing on this. But so I'll be interested to know what he says about the horizontal dimension. But what Harold is pointing out is generally true about all modern forms of spirituality. They're all about individual development, about the vertical dimension. And as you know, Harold pointed out, the faith is really looking at both dimensions and talking about changing social structures and patterns of behavior. And so it's the faith is equally community or corporate oriented. So, you know, from a Baha'i point of view, if you're just worried about your individual development, you might be on the right track, but you're on the wrong train. So anyway, that's just my comment on that one. It's all, you know, when Baha'u'llah says, I desire to see you all as one soul in one body, eating with one mouth and so on, fingers of one hand and so on and so forth. This is really an image of collective unity. It's we are all one. You know, it's e pluribus unum. Isn't that the motto of the United States? I don't know. Out
That's
of
the
many
motto.
one, out of many one. And that's So yeah, that's a very major contribution the faith is making. It's bringing back that collective, because let's face it, we live in a hyper individualistic, if not narcissistic society. It's all about me, I, and my. I mean, just listen to the commercials on television. I mean, if you can stand to, I mute most of them because I can't stand them anymore. But you know, it's all about catering to the individual and the individual's needs and pampering the individual and all of this business. Anyway, that's my comment.
See, that's why I started with this, because I know that's where we're all surrounded by. We're all comfortable with it. We know about it. Okay, Meryl, you had your hand up and then Bill did as well. So go ahead, Meryl.
Yeah, I feel that we need to give Wilbur a good chance. And as Mark says, he had to start somewhere. And then in terms of every religion being individualistic, no, there's the indigenous are very collective, and Ubuntu is very collective. So those exist.
True. No.
Yeah, I think it's true to say, though, that the Baha'i faith is putting it on a whole new level of being widespread right across the entire globe.
But so does, like, I just watched the summit with
COP27?
No, Dalai Lama and
Oh, yeah.
Mentutu, the Global Joy Summit. And I think a lot of that will resonate with, because it was profound. And so there's Tibetan Buddhism there, and then Desmond Tutu, which Ubuntu, and so on. And there was even science incorporated in that summit. I don't want to go on about that because you guys can look it up.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It seemed consonant, like something I was reading for class 4 just seemed to really make sense, because it was saying there's an underlying I can't find words. I shouldn't take more
Are
time.
you talking about a unity underneath?
Yeah, an underlying wisdom that has gotten overlaid by all this individualism stuff. But this is kind of a stuff that's come in for reasons. I mean, there's reasons that it came in, but underneath that, in our human history, there's a lot of this other wisdom that's broader that we ignore because we get trapped in that individualistic stuff.
So maybe it's a bit like a pendulum swing that we've for a long time we were sort of
and
swamped by the communion with the big group, but then we moved all the way over here in the far corner to the individualism.
That's why I think we need to read the whole book, like this one, reading this whole book. Yeah. And then talk about it.
Well, I don't know how many people would actually listen to me if I said, go forth and read that book before next week.
I know.
It's too bad, but I know my limits. Okay, anybody else wanting to say something?
So,
yeah, go ahead, Bill.
Well, a couple things. One is that I've actually been reading these books that you recommended, and which is quite amazing itself.
Yeah.
But I'm just stunned by this guy, and I certainly don't see myself in a position to say this guy is not going to be of value to my understanding of these matters. But kind of simplifying the discussion about vertical and horizontal and such as that, I just have this one question, and that is, of what value do these 1,000 people who have reached nirvana, so to speak, what value have they been to humanity's progress?
Hmm.
Oh, boy. Well, from our present position, it's very difficult to tell because we don't appreciate those kind of subtleties. We're so used to focusing on materialism that, you know, if they've affected our spiritual environment in some way, most of us wouldn't notice. I don't know. I don't know how to answer that question. You stumped me.
I
So-
think continue class 4.
Well, I've got a couple more comments here first, Mary. Eva and then Jack.
Okay.
Okay, Eva, go ahead. You're there you
Sorry.
go.
For me, the Baha'i faith is three-dimensional. It's not vertical and horizontal, but we have three protagonists. We have individual transformation, we have society transformation, and then we have institutional transformation.
Mhm.
And I think this is what is very new and very important. And without the institutional transformation, we're not going to build the wonderful world that we want to live in.
That's a point well worth making. Well, I would have to agree with you. Well, Jack?
Yeah, Shoghi Effendi, I think, was quite categorical on what Eva's saying. I just want to share a comment from John Lennon, who wanted us to give peace a chance, relating to Bill Kelly's question. After he was assassinated, I had a dream about John Lennon. I don't know if I was really communicating with him or not. I'd like to think I was, but he was in the Dakota apartment playing the piano. He didn't look extremely happy, but he looked up at me and said very emphatically, "World peace is more important than your personal problem."
Mm.
So that's all I want to share. In other words, get on with the job, you know.
Boy. I bet that stopped you in your tracks. Okay, Meryl.
Yeah, I just finished that master's in transformative spirituality, leadership and spirituality at St. Paul University.
Mhm.
And there were people who were working with this guy's
Framework
framework
or model.
in terms of institutional transformation. There's whole books on that we read.
Interesting.
So it does exist. One of the books is by a guy named Lalux, Lalux, and I'd have to find the book to get you the title, but
Could you
anyway.
do that for me? Could you send it to me in an email?
Yeah, I can probably just look for it right now.
Well, maybe put it in the chat.
Yeah, or by email. Yeah.
Sure.
Anyway, I'll leave I can hear you guys while I look for it.
Okay, fair enough. And anybody else? Or shall we start into number 4?
Yeah, Mary wants us to get on, so let's get on.
Yeah, fair enough. Now, okay, I have to
Found.
just a minute. Whoops.
Here it is.
Sorry.
The book is right here.
Sorry, I'm just finding the
Thanks, Meryl. I-
readings for number 4. There, okay, and then I'll put that in.
Maybe Meryl, can you put it in the chat?
All right. I'm not good at that.
Okay, so I think I've found the proper set of readings to go with this chapter or this class. Can everybody see that great chain of being on the screen? Just nod your head or,
Yeah.
okay, good. That's a relief. Now, so tonight it's the great chain of being. I want to talk about perennial philosophy for a few minutes. So in this book, Eye of the Spirit, published in 1997, Wilber asks, what is the worldview that has been the dominant official philosophy of the larger part of civilized humankind through most of its history? What is the worldview that the greater number of the subtler speculative minds and of the great religious teachers, both East and West, have in their various fashions been engaged in? And his answer would be, and we'll see who's here. Jack, could you read this first one for me, please?
I'd like to. The print is a little small, but I think I can read it.
I
So any-
can change that. I think I have to stop sharing to do it. Just hang on.
I can read it. I think
Oh,
I
okay.
can make it out as it is. It's quite small, but I can make it out. Reading number 1.
Yep.
What is the worldview that led Alan Watts to state flatly that we are hardly aware of the extreme peculiarity of our own position and find it difficult to realize the plain fact that there has otherwise been a single philosophical consensus of universal extent? It has been held by men and women who report the same insights and teach the same essential doctrine, whether living today or 6,000 years ago, whether from New Mexico in the Far East or from Japan in the Far West or from Japan in the Far East. Ken Wilber, The Eye of Spirit.
Okay. So this central human belief for thousands of years in many different traditions is called the perennial philosophy. It's known as perennial because it shows up across cultures and across the ages with many similar features. It has formed the core of not only the world's great wisdom traditions from Christianity to Buddhism to Taoism, but also many of the greatest philosophers, scientists, and psychologists of both East and West, North and South. Hangame, could you read number 2 for me, please?
Sure. So overwhelmingly widespread is the perennial philosophy that it is either the single greatest intellectual error ever to appear in humankind's history, an error so colossally widespread as to literally stagger the mind, or it is the single most accurate reflection of reality yet to appear.
Okay, thank you. So the key idea of the perennial philosophy is the notion of the great chain of being. It is, in fact, a rather simple idea. Reality, according to perennial philosophy, is not one-dimensional. It is not a flatland of uniform substance stretching monotonously before the eye. This is Arthur O. Lovejoy, who was alive from 1873 to 1962. He was an American philosopher and intellectual historian. In 1932-33, he gave the William James Lectures at Harvard University. The book of his remarks was called The Great Chain of Being, a study of the history of an idea. It was so influential that single-handedly created the discipline known as the history of ideas. And this is the cover of the book. So let's go back here. Now, Aruna, are you able to read tonight?
No, sorry, I'm on the phone right now. So
Okay,
I'm
no
on the
problem.
phone, I can't see the writing.
Right. And I don't think David Oak is online today. Is that correct?
That's right. He's not. gonna be with
Okay.
us tonight.
Well, how about Marie Palmer? I know she's here. How about number 3 for us?
Rather, reality is composed of several different but continuous dimensions. Manifest reality consists of different grades or levels, reaching from the lowest and most dense and least conscious to the highest and most subtle and most conscious. At one end of this continuum of being or spectrum of consciousness is what we in the West would call matter, or the insentient and the non-conscious. And at the other end is spirit, or Godhead, or the superconscious, which is also said to be the all-pervading ground of the entire sequence. Arrayed in between are the other dimensions of being arranged according to their individual degrees of reality, Plato, actuality, Aristotle, inclusiveness, Hegel, consciousness, Aurobindo, clarity, Leibniz, embrace, Plotinus, or knowingness, Garib Dorji. Ken Wilber, The Eye of Spirit.
Okay. So you can see he's ranging over a large territory in this particular passage. We have talked about Aurobindo and consciousness as it shows up in different levels. So it would fit into this idea of the great chain of being. And it goes way back to Plato, for instance. Often the great chain is presented as having just 3 major levels: matter, mind, and spirit. Other versions give 5 levels: matter, body, mind, soul, and spirit. Yet others give exhaustive breakdowns of the great chain. Some of the yogic systems give literally dozens of discrete yet continuous dimensions. Wilber tends to focus on the 3 or 5 level versions. The central claim of the perennial philosophy is that men and women can grow and develop or evolve all the way up the hierarchy to spirit itself. Therein to realize a supreme identity with Godhead, the perfect being toward which all growth and evolution yearns. So, as a Baha'i, my hackles go up as soon as we start talking about identity with Godhead. And they may do the same thing for you. But I think we just have to be a little bit lenient rather than tearing it to shreds before we know what we're talking about. Let's just see what he means by being one with Godhead before we say this is not possible. It may be that our writings say something similar, but without using exactly that kind of language. Let's just hold off and see. So notice that the great chain is a hierarchy. As Wilber puts it, this is a word that has fallen on very hard times. Originally, it was used by the Christian mystic Saint Dionysius to mean governing one's life by spiritual principles. Hiero means sacred or holy, and arch means governance or rule. But it soon came to be translated into a political military power play, where governance by spirit came to mean ruled by the Catholic Church. But as used by the perennial philosophy and by modern psychology, evolutionary theory, and systems theory, a hierarchy is simply a ranking of orders of events according to their holistic capacity. Let's see what he says next here. Harold, Did you read number
Yeah.
four?
Reading number 4, in any developmental sequence, what is whole at one stage becomes merely a part of a larger whole at the next stage. A letter is part of a whole word, which is part of a whole sentence, which is part of a whole paragraph, and so on. Arthur Koestler coined the term holon to refer to that which, being a whole in one context, is part of a wider whole in another.
That's Arthur Koestler. Quite a good writer and thinker. Hierarchy then is simply an order of increasing holons, representing an increase in wholeness and integrative capacity. Thus, each expanding link in the great chain of being represents an increase in unity and wider identities. The isolated identity of the body progresses through the social and communal identity of the mind to the supreme identity of spirit, an identity with literally all manifestation. That's why the great hierarchy of being is often drawn as a series of concentric circles or spheres, or as Wilber calls them, nests within nests. So he says that the great chain is actually the great nest of being. Another feature of hierarchy is its asymmetry. The process does not occur in reverse. So, for example, first there are letters, then words, then sentences, then paragraphs, but not vice versa. This means there is an unavoidable hierarchy or ranking or asymmetrical order of increasing wholeness. So Wilber gives several examples of this hierarchization process. Each of the following demonstrates increasing wholeness. That would be this. Okay. So in biology, this is one he quotes all the time. You go from molecules to cells, to organ systems, to organisms, to societies of organisms. Larger and larger each time. In cognitive development, awareness expands from simple images, which represent only one thing, to symbols and concepts which represent whole groups or classes of things and events, to rules which integrate numerous classes and groups into entire networks. In moral development in both men and women, it's a reasoning that moves from the isolated subject to a group or tribe of related subjects to an entire network of groups beyond any isolated element. In each case, these hierarchical networks unfold in a sequential or stage-like fashion. You first have to have molecules, then cells, then organs, then complex organisms. Growth generally occurs in stages, and stages, of course, are ranked in both a logical and chronological order. The more holistic patterns emerge later in development because they have to await the emergence of the parts that they will then integrate or unify, just as whole sentences emerge only after whole words do. So in any developmental or growth sequence, as a more encompassing stage or holon emerges, it includes the capacities and patterns and functions of the previous stage, of the previous holons, and then adds its own unique and more encompassing capacities. In that sense, and in that sense only, the new and more encompassing holon can be said to be higher or wider. Whatever the important value of the previous stage, the new stage has all of that plus something extra. And that something extra means extra value relative to the previous stage. So this next passage is an example. Oh, where are we at now? Oh, Linda Russell. Number 5. It's a bit long, but just take it slow.
Reading number 5. In cognitive and moral development in both the boy and the girl, The stage of pre-operational or pre-conventional thought is concerned largely with the individual's own point of view, narcissistic. The next stage, the operational or conventional stage, still takes account of the individual's own point of view, but adds the capacity to take the view of others into account. Nothing is lost, something is added. And so in this sense, it is properly said that this stage is higher or wider, meaning more valuable and useful for a wider range of interactions. Conventional thought is more valuable than pre-conventional thought in establishing a balanced moral response. And post-conventional is even more valuable, and so on. As Hegel first put it, and as developmentalists have echoed ever since, each stage is adequate and valuable, but each higher stage is more adequate, and in that sense, more valuable, which always means more holistic.
Aha, good. For all these reasons, Kessler, having noted that all complex hierarchies are composed of holons, or increasing orders of wholeness, pointed out that the correct word for hierarchy is actually holarchy. In normal or natural holarchies, larger networks of increasing wholeness unfold through a series of stages, with the larger or wider wholes being able to exert influence over the lower order wholes, like the national government being able to impose its will on the provincial government. Ha ha ha. That's not really happening, but that's the theory. This arrangement allows for holarchies to turn pathological. If the higher levels can exert control over the lower levels, they can also dominate or even repress and alienate the lower levels. That possibility leads to a whole host of pathological difficulties in both the individual and society at large. Because the world is arranged holarchically, because it contains fields within fields within fields, things can go profoundly wrong. A disruption or pathology in one field can reverberate throughout an entire system. The cure for this pathology in all cases is essentially the same: rooting out the pathological holons so the holarchy itself can return to harmony. So in the Baha'i case, who are you thinking of? Covenant breakers. Right? They have to be rooted out or they'll continue to poison the entire community. The cure does not consist, as the reductionists maintain, in getting rid of holarchy altogether. Even if that were possible, it would result in a uniform, one-dimensional flat line of no value distinctions at all. No, the cure for any disease system consists in rooting out any holons that have usurped their position in the overall system by abusing their power of upward or downward causation. Eva, could you read this number 6 for me?
This is exactly the cure we see at work in psychoanalysis. Shadow holons refuse integration. Democratic social revolutions, monarchical or fascist holons oppress the body politic. Medical science interventions, cancerous holons invade the benign system. Critical social theory, opaque ideology usurps even open communication. Radical feminist critique, patriarchal columns dominate the public sphere, and so on. It is not getting rid of holarchy per se, but addressing and integrating their arrogant holons. I like the arrogant holons.
So depending on what you focus on in your television watching, for instance, many of these will jump out at you as something that you know a lot about. For instance, the democratic social revolutions in Iran at the moment, for instance, or in China. They're trying to get rid of fascist holons, which have oppressed them for decades. And anybody who's had cancer understands that medical science intervention to root out the cancer in order to restore health. It's a simple idea, but it's got many, many applications.
So Mark, you're saying that the holon has no intrinsic value in itself. It can be either positive or negative in that sense, depending on its effect on the individual or the body politic. Because if there's rebellious or sickly or suppressive holons, that, that would mean that not all holons are necessarily healthy things.
Mm-hmm.
Is it a value neutral type of thing, depending on what it does, or?
Yeah, that's more like it. I mean, what we're talking about in this particular reading is the social holon. But we can also be talking about individual holons, human beings, right? Oppressing each other. So you're right. It is sort of value free depending until somebody takes action, and then you'll know what kind of quality that particular holon has. It demonstrates it through its actions.
It made me think of a concept that I read in Eckhart Tolle's spiritual philosophy. He says, the pain body needs feeding. Which is why people get into dysfunctional relationships, because they're feeding one another's pain body instead of their higher self. The pain body needs feeding. So that's an unhealthy holon.
No kidding.
Yeah.
So Margaret, how does this strike you? I mean, with your medical background?
Yeah, I'm kind of trying to think about that. Like a cancerous entity derives from the natural healthy tissue, but goes astray, and then wants to take over, tries to invade surrounding tissues, take the blood supply from the healthy tissues, of course, take the nourishment from the rest of the body, and eventually, though, it kills the body. I don't know whether I guess the other holons have the potential for doing that if they're not arrested. Fascist and oppressive regimes, etc. They eventually rot out from the head or the top or whatever is trying to suppress.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe we're seeing some of that, but it's a struggle to watch. Much more of a struggle to participate, I guess. But
mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But Margaret, when the body dies, the cancer dies with it. So it's on a self-destructive, suicidal.
Sure it is. Yeah, it is. Yeah. And if medical science is good enough, maybe we get the cancer without getting the patient.
Okay.
That's the hope.
That's the hope.
Yeah. Okay. I'm just going to do one quick little section before we leave it. So is spirit transcendent or immanent in Wilber's thinking? It's generally agreed that all of the world's great wisdom traditions are basically variations of the perennial philosophy. Houston Smith, in his book Forgotten Truth, summarizes the world's major religions in one phrase: a hierarchy of being and knowing. Chogyam Trungpa pointed out that the essential and background idea pervading all of the philosophies of the East from India to Tibet to China, lying behind everything from Shintoism to Taoism, is a hierarchy of earth, human, and heaven, which he has also pointed out is equivalent to body, mind, and spirit. And Ananda Kumaraswamy noted that the world's great religions, bar none, in their different degrees, represent a hierarchy of types or levels of consciousness extending from animal to deity, and according to which one and the same individual may function on different occasions. The wisdom traditions subscribe to the notion that reality manifests in levels or dimensions, with each higher dimension being more inclusive and therefore closer to the absolute totality of Godhead or Spirit. In this sense, Spirit is the summit of being, the highest rung on the ladder of evolution. But it's also true that Spirit is the wood out of which the entire ladder and all of its rungs are made. Spirit is the suchness, the isness, the essence of each and everything that exists. The first aspect, the highest rung aspect, is the transcendental nature of Spirit. It far surpasses any worldly or creaturely or finite things. The entire earth or even the universe could be destroyed and Spirit would still remain. The second aspect, the wood aspect, is the immanent nature of Spirit. In this aspect, Spirit is equally and totally present in all manifest things and events, in nature, in culture, in heaven and on earth, with no partiality. From this point of view, no phenomenon whatsoever is closer to Spirit than another, for all are equally made of Spirit. Thus, Spirit is both the highest goal of all development and evolution and the ground of the entire sequence, as fully present at the beginning as at the end. Spirit is prior to this world, but not other than this world. So that seems like a good place for me to end tonight. We got about halfway through class number 4.